The Future Poetry, Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 2, The Essence of Poetry. What then is the nature of poetry, its essential law? What is the highest power we can demand from it? What the supreme music that the human mind, reaching up and in and out to its own widest breadths, deepest depths and topmost summits, can extract from this self-expressive instrument? And how out of that does there arise the possibility of its use as the mantra of the real? Not that we need spend any energy in a vain effort to define anything so profound, elusive and indefinable as a breath of poetic creation, to take the myriad string harp of Saraswati to pieces for the purpose of scientific analysis is a narrow and barren amusement. But we stand in need of some guiding intuition, some helpful descriptions which will serve to enlighten our search, to fix in that way, not by definition, but by description, the essential things in poetry is neither an impossible nor an unprofitable endeavor. We meet here two common enough errors, to one of which the ordinary and uninstructed mind is most liable, to the other, the too instructed critic, or the too intellectually conscientious artist or craftsman. To the ordinary mind, judging poetry without really entering into it, it looks as if it were nothing more than an aesthetic pleasure of imagination, the intellect and the ear, a sort of elevated pastime. If that were all, we need not have wasted time in seeking for its spirit, its inner aim, its deeper law. Anything pretty, pleasant and melodious with a beautiful idea in it would serve our turn. A song of Anacreon or a plaint of the Mimnermus would be as satisfying as the poetic sense as the Oedipus, Agamemnon or Odyssey. For from this point of view they might well strike us as equally and even. One might contend more perfect in their light, but exquisite unity and brevity. Pleasure, certainly, we expect from poetry as from all art, but the external sensible and even the inner imaginative pleasure are only first elements. For these must not only be redefined in order to meet the highest requirements of the intelligence, the imagination and the ear, but afterwards they have to be still farther heightened and in their nature raised beyond even their own noblest levels, so that they may become the support for something greater beyond them. Otherwise they cannot lead to the height on which lives the mantra. For neither the intelligence, the imagination, nor the ear are the true, or at least the deepest or highest recipients of the poetic delight, even as they are not its true or highest creators. They are only its channels and instruments. The true creator, the true hearer, is the soul. The more rapidly and transparently the rest do their work of transmission, the less they make of their separate claim to satisfaction, the more directly the word reaches and sinks deep into the soul, the greater the poetry. Therefore poetry has not really done its work, at least its highest work, until it has raised the pleasure of the instrument and transmuted it into the deeper delight of the soul, a divine ananda, a delight interpretative, creative, revealing, formative. One might almost say an inverse reflection of the joy with which the universal soul felt in its great release of energy when it rang out into the rhythmic forms of the universe, the spiritual truth, the large interpretive idea, the life, the power, the emotion of things packed into the original creative vision. Such spiritual joy is that which the soul of the poet feels, and which, when he can conquer the human difficulties of his tasks, he succeeds in pouring also into all those who are prepared to receive it. This delight is not merely a godlike pastime. It is a great formative and illuminative power. The critic of a certain type, or the intellectually conscientious artist, will, on the other hand, often talk as if poetry were mainly a matter of faultlessly correct and at most an exquisite technique. Certainly, in all art, good technique is the first step towards perfection, but there are so many other steps. There's a whole world beyond before you can get near to what you seek. So much so that even a deficient correctness of execution will not prevent an intense and gifted soul from creating great poetry, which keeps its hold on for the centuries. Moreover, technique, however indispensable, occupies a smaller field, perhaps in poetry, than in any other art. First, because its instrument, the rhythmic word, is fuller of subtle and immaterial elements. Then, because the most complex, flexible, variously suggestive of all the instruments of the artistic creator, it has more, almost infinite possibilities in many directions than other. The rhythmic word has a subtle, sensible element, its sound value, a quite immaterial element, its significance or thought value. And both of these again, its sound and its sense, have separately and together a soul value, a direct spiritual power, which is infinitely the most important thing about them. And though this comes to birth with a small element subject to the laws of technique, yet almost immediately, almost at the beginning of its flight, its power soars up beyond the province of any law of mechanical construction. And this form of speech carries in it on its summit an element which draws close to the empire of the ineffable. Poetry rather determines its own form. The form is not imposed on it by any law mechanical external to it. The poet, least of all artists, needs to create with his eye fixed anxiously on the technique of his art. He has to possess it, no doubt, but in the heat of creation, the intellectual sense of it becomes a subordinate action, or even a mere undertone in his mind. And in his best moments, he is permitted in a way to forget it altogether. For then the perfection of his sound, movement, and style come entirely as the spontaneous form of his soul, that utters itself in an inspired rhythm and an innate, a revealed word, even as the universal soul created the harmonies of the universe out of the power of the word secret and eternal within him, leaving the mechanical work to be done in a search of hidden spiritual excitement by the subconscious part of his nature. It is this highest speech, which is the supreme poetic utterance, the immortal element of his poetry, and a little of it is enough to save the rest of his work from oblivion.